This is Eric L. Donovan, the Mindset Disruption Strategist. Let's talk about investing. More specifically, let's talk about surviving a bear market. But before I do that, please do make sure to subscribe to this channel. And while you're at it, hit the notification bell so that you get an update every time I'm uploading new videos on how to help your family thrive by redefining success and to make an impact and build generational prosperity. So, I think the first thing that we need to do before we talk about surviving a bear market is we need to define what a bear market is. So, there's some definitions that float in and out of the financial services industry. And before I get to bear market, I need to kind of bring you through all the definitions that might come at you as you're watching this noise that's happening in the marketplace. Because if you've watched some of my other videos, the other thing that I will tell you is the very most important thing is not what's happening on the short term of the markets. It's what's happening on the way that you buy and own really good, high quality companies that make sense for the long term. And there will be short-term volatility, short-term up and down. It's going to happen. So you can never buy into good quality companies with anything less than a 5 to 10 year time horizon. And in that 5 to 10 year time horizon, I can't tell you what the markets themselves might do, because I'm not concerned with the markets. What I'm concerned with is that I buy a company that makes sense to own, and despite the outside environment that I can't control, do the long-term prospects of what that company is going to be able to do look really strong. So with that fundamental, let's get into these definitions that surround the day-to-day trading and the annual type trading that happens. So, two terms that you need to know. You need to know the term correction, and you need to know the term bear market. So a correction is a drop in the overall market. And now, so when I say overall, let's be really careful. There's lots of different ways to define that. Some people might define it by the Dow, which is just 30 companies. They might define it by the S&P 500, which is approximately 500 companies. There's the Russell 1000, which is 1,000 large companies. And so all of those are large companies. There's measurements for small companies. The Russell 2000 is all small companies. You've got measurements for the international market. So even when you're using these terms, sometimes the media will be selective about what it is they're using. So you've got to be careful about when they say correction or they say bear market or they say, well, which market are they talking about? Because even then, they're not clear. It's just terms that they love to throw around. But here are the definitions. So a correction is when the market, whichever one they're measuring, right, has dropped by more than 10%. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. One, if it drops 9%, turns around and goes back up, you didn't have a correction. If it drops 11%, you did have a correction, or even 10.1%. It's that fine line of crossing that line of 10%. The other thing that you need to know, just for information purposes, is it's very, very common that the overall stock market, probably pretty much more measured by the S&P 500, will drop at least 14% almost every single year. Every year? No, not necessarily every year, but if you average it out, it's about an average of about a 14% drop almost every single year. And 75% of years invested in good quality companies show a positive return. So what that means is you will have years where the market sometime in the middle will go down 14% or more, and yet it turns out positive. So just because there's a temporary decline doesn't mean that the market's going to stay down permanently. The other thing that you need to understand is there's a lot of noise that'll happen around markets and defining, these corrections where they'll talk about them, and it's like, hey, I think there's going to be a correction this year. That sounds ominous. That's like saying, I think the sun's going to come up tomorrow. Guess what? There's probably going to be a correction this year. And so these talking heads will throw out these terms like something's going on, when in reality, they're just trying to scare you. It's common. It happens. Corrections are normal. But we're here to talk about bear markets. So what is a bear market? Well, a bear market is when the market declines by more than 20%. They happen on average about every 4 to 5 years. Typically, you'll run into a bear market. Here's what's interesting about looking at bear markets. If you're down 18%, that could feel really painful. That's still just a correction. But if you go down 20% or 20.1%, that's a bear market. Down 40%, also a bear market. There's not a different definition. It's just these terms that people are throwing around. But because they cause so much hand wringing and because they cause so much anxiety, I wanted to spend some time just talking about how I've found ways to thrive, to survive a bear market. We're talking another video about thriving in it, but let's talk today simply about surviving a bear market. Now, the first thing is just knowledge. What happens when a bear market happens? Well, on average, when we enter in down 20%, so you're up at this place and you come down 20%, how long does it take until we get our money back, till we've made it back? The average is about 40 months, a little over 3 years, not quite 4 years. So even when we run into one, I've made all of my money back in a little over 3 years and then continued to climb higher. I'm better off. And the other thing that I've learned, as much as you'd like to say, hey, I just get out of it and then get back in, it's not that easy. The emotional decision that it takes to get out is pretty easy. The emotional decision to get back in, I have yet to see anyone consistently get right. Almost every single person who gets out and tries to get gets back in higher than where they got out. And you're like, I wish I could avoid the bear market. Yeah, me too. I understand what you're saying. It's the reason that my other videos talk about how to own really high quality companies, because I want to own high quality companies that no matter what's going on from a market standpoint, I'm looking at that longer term perspective. And so if I know there's 40 months, now I can start to make some decisions. So if I'm a person who has 5 to 10 years, I'm going to tell you what, there's not a whole lot of magic to it. I'm going to quit opening my statements and I'm going to write it out. I'm going to keep an eye on the high quality companies and I'm going to watch what they're doing in their market space and just make sure that I still believe in what they're doing, because I cannot control the market environment that sits around me. But let's pretend for a minute that I know that I'm going to need a certain amount of money over the next 5 years. This is where you really can survive with a lot more peace than most people typically realize. And it's this. Let's say that I know I'm going to need $40,000 every single year out of my investment portfolio to live on or do some things with, right? Well, I know that it's going to take 40 months if the market were to go down. And the last thing I want to do is sell these good, high quality companies that I have when they're at a place that's much less than what I paid for them. So here's what I do. I put 1 year of cash into my pocketbook. Right? It could be on hand in my account. It could be on hand at the bank, whatever. But I've got 1 year of cash on hand. And then I start to do something interesting. I look over the next 5 years or 4 remaining years, and I lay that same amount of cash out. Now, where did this idea come from? And I'm going to get more specific into what I'm talking about so you can actually see a visual representation of this. But I remember growing up in West Texas and my family would can, take fruits and vegetables and everything that they grew and put them into jars, put them into mason jars for the canning process, which would then preserve them. And I remember going down into my grandmother's cellar, which just, I can almost smell today, but being in that cellar and just seeing rows and rows of things that were canned. And I remember asking my grandmother about that, and her comment was, some years the harvest is really, really good, and we don't need to use any of this, and we put more away. And sometimes the harvest isn't so good. And so in that year, we don't have enough to live on. So we can come down here and we can open these jars and we can live on that during the lean season until we hit a season when the harvest is robust again. And that's exactly the same type of concept that I began to think about and put into play here, because what I realized was, what if I had a jar for year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5? And Eric, why 5 years? Well, if it's 40 months peak to peak, and that's a little over 3 years, I want to give myself time for the market to go even higher. So if the market starts to decline and I don't have enough money to take off the top of my portfolio to live on, because you're going to use all this cash up, and then you're sitting in a time period where it's like, ooh, now I only have 4 years left, right? Because you used your cash up, and then year 2 becomes year 1, year 3 becomes year 2. You get what I'm saying, right? So you'd be down to only 4 years of money left. So in that instance, what you're doing is putting yourself in a place to make a decision, not emotionally, but from a place of peace. Because it's year 2, the market's down. Okay, I don't have to live off of this. And it, depending on how bad the market gets, right? You could be living on year 3 or year 4. But what I've found for most people is there's so much peace that comes inside of this to survive the bear market. It's like, because I don't have to worry about what my stocks are doing over the next 5 years. I have 5 years of cash to live on, or I have 4 years, I have 3 years of cash. And you begin to see the recovery typically over 40 months, and you can start to make decisions. And let's say you did have to go through that 40 months and you're living on the jar that's year 4. What are you doing? Well, as the market begins to go up, then you start harvesting, and maybe you put another year in place. And then maybe you put another year in place as the market continues to rise. You use when the harvest is plentiful and you've made your money back to then put your other bonds in place. But what I have found for most people who are trying to survive a bear market, putting 5 years of cash into strategies that allow you to know where you're going to get your money from over that time period. We're not getting into specific products here. There are different products out there that do a really, really good job of this. But knowing that that's there, I've watched give peace to countless people to survive when the media and everything else is just going crazy, and you know you own good, high quality companies, but you're like, how do I survive this? And how do I mentally put myself in a place to thrive? And that's the next video I'm going to be coming out with. You want to look for this one, how to thrive in a bear market. Because not only does this help you survive, but you may want to look at what it looks like to thrive inside of a bear market. Because when you can do this and you can bring peace to your overall situation, to your family, this is ultimately where you create impact in your home and outside your home. And that type of impact ripples through and helps you build the generational prosperity I keep talking about. So thank you so much for being here. I'd love for you to like and comment on this video. I'd love to just kind of hear your comments and what you're thinking about this idea. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you. Have a fantastic